So we all have this deep fear that we're irrelevant, that we're uninteresting, that we're forgettable. Maybe you don't feel that way all the time, but I am confident that you have felt that way at least some of the time, if not often. Think back to when everything changed about a year ago to being online. And we did Zoom, we did Google Meets, and there's that weird feeling of like everybody looking at you on the screen. But then you start to realize, like, I'm just gonna mute my mic, and then I'm just gonna turn my camera off. And turning the camera off and muting the mic gives you like a whole new level of freedom. It's like nobody can see me, nobody can hear me, I can just do what I need to do, right? So like you've got that freedom to go to the bathroom or get snacks or wear your PJs all day long. But have you ever wondered, if my mic is off and my camera is off, does it even matter if I'm here at all? Like if I logged off, would anyone even notice that I'd logged off? Often that's how we start to feel towards God. Does he even notice? Like, are we even a blip on his radar? Do we even matter at all? Now, there are times when we feel like we are the center of the universe, or at least that we should be the center of the universe, right? Like if you need a ride to practice and practice starts in like 15 minutes, we all have that instinct to be like, everyone needs to stop what they're doing and somebody needs to give me a ride, right? Or if your family's deciding what movie to watch tonight and there are movies that you just really don't like you might feel like they shouldn't even be up for discussion. Like, nope, I don't like those, don't even consider them. But then there are times when it feels like nobody notices us, our needs, who we are, our preferences, that no one notices them at all. When you're in a really weird situation where you're like the new person to a group that is already established, and maybe nobody talks to you, or worse, people talk about things, but it's things that only those people know about. So you feel even more like you're being made to know that you're on the outside of this inner core group. Or maybe it's other things. Like maybe you hear your parents brag about like your sister's SAT scores or how good your brother is at sports, but you don't hear them say anything about you. And it's the not hearing anything that makes you feel invisible. And it may not be your friend or your friends or your family. It could be, your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your coach or your teacher or any combination of those that don't make you feel seen or valued by the people in our lives. And it starts to make us feel like we don't matter. Whenever we feel like we're overlooked or ignored, it's easy to become discouraged. And then what follows that often is we become numb and then we disengage. Like if nobody's listening, why bother speaking, right? And if nobody's paying attention, does it really matter what we even do? When we feel like we don't matter, the passion and the excitement starts to drip out of our lives. We don't feel like we're thriving in life. We don't feel excited about life. We feel like we're just surviving. And nobody wants to feel that way. No one wants to feel kind of about their lives. But it's more than that. It's possible that we have a lot of people in our lives, maybe your parents, your friends, your grandparents, your teachers, that tell you that they value you, but you just don't believe them because you feel like whatever their role is in your life, that they have to say that stuff, right? Like I remember when my dad would tell me I was pretty, I'd be like, please, like, you're my dad, like, P.S., I kind of look like you, right? So you have to say that. So what that leads to is when we feel like we don't matter, what we try to do is we start striving really hard to be exceptional in some way, to get noticed and to get praised in some way. And we strive just to feel like we're worthy of people taking notice. And it's how we try to make ourselves and our lives relevant and important. But despite our efforts, we might still end up feeling like we don't really matter. The good news is today we're going to talk about someone who is very acquainted with feeling like they didn't matter. And what we learn from her life is a game changer for all of us. So we're in this series Afterlife where we're talking about how Jesus showed up in the world and then conquered death, and he's bigger and better than we could possibly imagine. But more specifically, we're talking about people that knew Jesus in life and then encountered him after he resurrected. And then we're looking at how that changed their lives, because we can learn from that about how it might change our lives. So today we're going to talk about a woman named Mary and her experience with Jesus before and after the resurrection. But before we do that, I want us to get a little bit of context. So the Bible is a collection of books, and those books are divided into two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is the collection of books before Jesus was born and walked on earth. And then the New Testament records the birth of Jesus and then his life, death, resurrection, and then everything that follows after that. So the first four books of the New Testament are called the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These Gospels talk about a handful of different women named Mary. And this can get confusing because you might think, well, isn't that Jesus' mother? Yes, but there are also several other women named Mary. And so when Jesus is dying on the cross, there are two Marys that are actually mentioned there. One of them is Mary Magdalene, and she's who we're going to focus on today. Now, the truth is we don't know a lot about Mary Magdalene, but one thing we know for sure is that she was a committed follower of Jesus. In fact, her name is mentioned more than any woman who wasn't a member of Jesus's family throughout the entirety of Jesus's life. The gospel mentions her 12 times, and Luke tells us that she traveled with Jesus and helped to support his ministry financially. It also mentions that Mary had 7 demons driven out of her. Now you can pause there and just let that sink in. But basically that means that she was an outcast before she encountered Jesus and before he healed her. Mary understood what it's like to be ignored and overlooked, and like people just don't want you around. But here's why we're talking about her today. All 4 Gospels record that Mary Magdalene was there when Jesus was put on the cross. 3 of the 4 Gospels record that she was at Jesus's burial. And all 4 Gospels say that she was the first person to encounter the resurrected Jesus. And so she has an up close and personal view to Jesus's crucifixion and then his burial and then his resurrection. The disciples get a lot of credit for being Jesus's most loyal followers, but there was no other disciple that was around as much in these big moments at the end of Jesus's life and then at his resurrection as much as Mary was. And so as we celebrate the resurrection and we get ready to approach Easter, it's critical that we take a look at Mary's story because she witnessed so much of it firsthand. But she doesn't get a lot of attention. In a lot of ways, her life is kind of over on the sidelines. And if you don't pay attention to what you're reading, it just sounds like there are a bunch of women named Mary and that maybe they're not all that significant, that like maybe no one can keep track of them. But you definitely get the impression, if you read closely, that Mary Magdalene is a really critical part of this story. In the Gospel of John, which was written by another one of Jesus's disciples, it records that while it was still dark, Mary got up and went to the tomb. But when she got there, the stone that had been placed in front of this tomb was gone. And so Mary assumed that like someone has tampered with the grave and with Jesus's body because it's not there. So she goes straight to Peter and the other disciples to tell them, and they run to the tomb, and sure enough, Mary was right. The stone is gone. The body is gone. And all that was left were Jesus's grave clothes. And the other disciples left to go tell the others, but Mary stays there. And she stays right by his tomb. And as if the sadness of losing a friend wasn't painful enough, now his body is gone. Like what we hope for, that someone is going to rest peacefully after they die. Now his body is missing. And so that's making what's already feeling traumatic for her even worse. And so I want you to look about what John records next, because this is going to be really important. It says, this is John chapter 20, verses 11 through 19. It says, "Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw 2 angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. And they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Now, thinking that he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have ascended to the Father. I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to tell my brothers and tell them that I am ascending to the Father and your Father, to my God and to your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. So on the day when Jesus defeats death, proving God's love is bigger and stronger than anyone could have imagined, he makes sure that Mary is there to see it. Not just that she's there to see it, but that she's the first person to see it. And this is a big deal because in the first century when Jesus lived, a woman was not viewed as a reliable witness. She couldn't testify in court. Her word was not to be trusted over a man's word. And yet over and over again, at the cross, at the tomb, and on Easter morning, it was a woman who saw Jesus first, who recognized him, and who was given the job by Jesus of going to tell others of the resurrected Christ. When the rest of the world saw women as unreliable, inferior, and untrustworthy, Jesus saw something different. He valued and elevated women even when the rest of the world didn't. Jesus made the decision to trust Mary first with the message of the resurrection. He knew Mary. He called her by name. He chose her to be the first person to share the good news. While others made assumptions about Mary because of her gender and her past, anything else that could have written her out of the story, Jesus writes her in as a major character. Jesus made sure that Mary knew that she had value and that her word could be trusted. When the world was sending Mary one message about her worth, Jesus is actively sending another. And if Mary wondered who she could believe, the resurrection of Jesus gave Jesus all the credibility in the world. So no matter what messages others may have been giving Mary, no matter what messages we may be getting about our worth and our value, because of the resurrection, we can take Jesus seriously. We can trust that Jesus is who he said he is, and so we are who Jesus says we are. Jesus' resurrection, that first Easter, was the day that changed the world, because now everything Jesus said was proven to be true. No one else that had claimed to be a Messiah had resurrected from the dead. Easter morning, Jesus coming back from the dead proved that Jesus was who he said he was. So his words carry extra weight. And so that morning, he spoke words that tell us of Mary's worth and her value. In a culture where Mary would have heard again and again that she wasn't enough and that she didn't have credibility, and that she didn't belong, and that she should stay over on the edges and keep her mouth shut, because that's what we tell women in the first century. Jesus made sure that she knew from him that she was trusted with the most important message that there was to deliver. She was entrusted first with the message of the resurrected Christ. Jesus affirmed her value and her worth despite what the world might have said. This is a reminder of who Jesus is and how he consistently operates. This is the way of Jesus. Over and over again, we see Jesus honor and elevate people who feel overlooked, unseen, outcast, and forgotten. He said the name of people who thought their part in the story didn't matter. Because of Easter, because of the resurrection, Mary knew that what Jesus said should be taken seriously. She experienced Jesus' words firsthand. She witnessed his death, his burial, and his resurrection. And so she's as good of a source as we can possibly get. And she spread the message of the resurrection. And that message has carried all the way to us today, where we're now a week away from celebrating Easter ourselves. So the message that was first carried through Mary is now carried on to us. On a personal level, I cannot go without saying that when we see Jesus entrust Mary, a woman, with the first message of the resurrected Christ, it serves as God's affirmation of women in ministry. That God affirms the role of women to pastor and spread the good news of the gospel. If a woman is entrusted with the most important news ever, that speaks volumes about what God thinks of the role of women in his church and in his world. This Easter, that's the message that I want to take with you. You are seen, known, and loved, and you are important to God. Jesus says so, and he reminds us that despite any messages that we may have gotten from the world to the contrary, that he affirms our worth, and that is good news.